Hello again and welcome to the second video tutorial on the topic of price theory. Now, just to do a bit of a recap, in the first part we looked at an introduction into price theory and we introduced some of the important concepts of price theory. In the second part, we will be looking at demand and we will be also looking at how we construct or how we draw a demand curve. So let us get straight into it. Tutorial, we looked at the concept of demand and we said that this is where people are willing to buy a product at a specific price. Now, it's important to know that there is a certain relationship between the price of a product and the demand for the product. And this is known as the law of demand. And the law of demand states that as prices of goods increases, the quantity demanded for that good would decrease. And the same thing happens in the opposite direction, where if price decreases, quantity demanded for that price would increase. Now, as you can see, we have different directions occurring. So as price increases or decreases, there's always the opposite effect of the quantity demanded. And these are the terms that get thrown around when we speak about the relationship between price and demand. We say that this relationship, it is negative, it is indirect, it is inverse, or it is opposite. These words all describe the relationship between demand and price. And it is also important to note that there are different factors which can change your quantity demanded for goods. Some of these factors which affect demand might include price changes, where your supplier might need to increase prices because they are running low on stock. Consumer preferences, where people might be changing the things that they like or prefer. New technologies, making it easier for people to get their hands onto products. If we use Takealot as an example of new technologies. Population changes is also a factor, as if there are more people coming into your country, there's going to be greater demand for businesses. Income levels, if people are receiving more money, they will then tend to demand more goods, and the nature of the product is also a factor which affects demand. People would normally demand more ice cream in summer than in winter. Some of the factors that would affect or change the demand for goods. Now, how do we view this demand? How do we illustrate this demand? Well, now we will move on to demand curves. As we see in front of us, we have two demand curves. They are both drawn from the left to the right in a downward sloping fashion. And although there might not be a curve in the furthest left graph, it is still a demand curve, with your price always being on your y-axis and your quantity demanded always on your x-axis. So how do we come about this specific graph? Well, let's get into an example on how to draw this graph. Here we see a nice example on our right hand side giving the price of a certain product and the quantity demanded for this good at these specific prices. So let's get into drawing this demand curve. So firstly, we'll need to draw our y-axis and our x-axis. We really just put a 0 just to indicate the point where y and x is 0. We then need to label our axes, where the y-axis is our price and our x-axis is our quantity demanded. Just to continue with the labeling, we are going to add the different prices and the different quantity demanded to our axis. So we start off with price, we start off with 50, and we make our way up to 250, and with quantity demanded we start off with 20 and we work our way to 100. Now to draw this graph we need to plot each bundle where quantity demanded and price are connected. So we look at price 250 and we see quantity demanded is 20. So we look for that spot, we find it, we label it. We then carry on in that same fashion going down the list. So at price 200 we demand 40, at price 150 we demand 60, at price 100 we demand 80, and at price 50 we demand 100. We then connect all the dots. We therefore have our demand curve, and do not forget to label your demand curve. D0 illustrates that this is our first and original demand curve. Now earlier we spoke about some factors which affect demand. These factors also affect demand curves, and there are two ways in which it affects your demand curve. It could either bring about a movement of the demand curve or a shift in the demand curve. A movement along the demand curve occurs only when there is a price change of a certain product. So a business might decide to decrease the price of a good to encourage more people to purchase it. This is then illustrated with a movement along your demand curve. A shift of your demand curve occurs when a factor besides price changes occurs. This means that your demand will either increase or decrease, but prices will remain constant. Let's look at an example to illustrate these changes in the demand curve. We'll start off with a movement. We'll use the example from previous, using only price 200 and 100. So let's say a business decides they are going to sell a good at price 200. We then can see that the quantity demanded at that price is 40. We can then draw our lines to illustrate this combination. The business then decides they are going to decrease their price to 100. And we can then see that people demand more at this lower price. And this is just an illustration of our law of demand, that as prices decrease, our demand will increase. We will now look at an example of a shift in the demand curve. So using the same example as earlier, we will just add a change to quantity demanded. Still using the price at 200, we see that the demand, the original demand, is at 40. But due to a change in demand, which is caused by anything other than a price change, so for example, income levels increased, new technologies have come about, consumer preferences has changed, we see a new demand curve. Now let's draw that. We then put in our 40 for our original quantity demanded. We can then add our 60 for our new quantity demanded. We then connect our original demand curve. At the same price of 200, we see that we've demanded more. So we illustrate that, and we see that this demand curve has now shifted to a new demand curve. And we illustrate this new demand curve with a D1, illustrating that our demand curve has changed from D0 to D1. And this concludes our second video tutorial on the topic of price theory. I hope it was valuable. Stay safe. See you next time.